We turn next to the higher cost of everything. We know how that's putting necessities like food and shelter in a place that's harder to reach for more and more Canadians. And that is bringing fresh calls for governments to do more, including a new appeal for a national school nutrition program. And starting this week, 6 provinces are bumping up the minimum wage. We're going to begin with Brett Ruskin in Halifax on this story. 2 parts to this morning. Brett, good morning. And let's talk about this minimum wage increases in 6 of the provinces. Which 6 and by how much?
Yeah, good morning, Heather. More money for minimum wage workers can't be a bad thing. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. But let's talk with the wages. Let's talk with the money. So we are looking here on the East Coast in 3 provinces, an increase of 50 cents per hour to the minimum wage. That's Nova Scotia and PEI, as well as Newfoundland and Labrador. Moving a bit further to the Eastern Canada, to Central Canada, we're looking at Ontario getting $1.05 increase to the minimum wage as of October 1st. Saskatchewan, another $1 an hour. Manitoba, $1.15 an hour. So that is an increase to those minimum wages across those provinces, throughout 6 provinces. Now, the ranking as to who makes the most in terms of which provinces pay the most, which provinces pay the least, pretty much unchanged except for New Brunswick. New Brunswick didn't change their minimum wage, still at $14.75 an hour. But that means that the other Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland, as well as Manitoba, has surpassed them to now those minimum wage workers making more in those provinces compared to New Brunswick. So that's kind of how things shape up now with this new level of minimum wages across the country. Heather?
We know, Brett, as you indicated there, I mean, advocates have been pushing for that $15 minimum wage for years now. And as you say, with many of these provinces now going beyond that. But we talk a lot about living wage now, not just minimum wage. So how do we interpret these increases? Are they a success?
Sure, it really depends who you ask. So yeah, we're looking at that $15 minimum wage here in Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland, Labrador, and Saskatchewan's going to be hitting that next year as well. That $15 minimum wage an hour threshold has been kind of talked about for years, but a $15 an hour years ago doesn't quite mean the same as $15 an hour now. Certainly not hitting that living wage level that many people are calling for, especially with the rising costs of basics like groceries. So here is Lars Osberg. He's an economist here at Dalhousie University. Here's what he had to say about this latest increase.
And the minimum wage is well less than what a reasonable living wage would be. It has gone up nearly in line with the rate of inflation. And of course, the rate of inflation for food and for rent has gone up much faster than the general rate of inflation.
And so overall, the minimum wage certainly has increased over the last day, since October 1st in these 6 provinces. That means better conditions for workers, so minimum wage workers, but more strain on employers in many cases. So it is a difficult decision, a balancing act for many of these provinces, one that is recurring, and then, Heather, one that we're likely going to talk about in the years ahead as well.
Brett, thank you very much. Starting our coverage there in Halifax, and Brett Ruskin. Now, as I was mentioning as we came on the air, there are fresh calls for the federal government to do more to bring about a nationally funded nutrition and food program into Canada schools. This country is currently the only G7 nation that doesn't have a national food program. So this morning, Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, our senior education reporter, takes a closer look at what advocates say needs to be done.
Organizations that run school food programs in Canada say they're facing a crisis. Whatever funding they can scrape together just doesn't go very far with grocery prices being so high. At the same time, more and more families depend on schools to provide their students with hot lunches and snacks, with families' money being stretched so tight. Now in Canada, school food programs exist in a kind of a patchwork. They exist in some jurisdictions but not in others, and these charitable organizations receive their funding from the cities, from the province, and they also rely on private donations. But what many advocates are saying Canada needs is a federally funded national school food program.
We now have about a third of the kids in Canada funded by provinces and cities, some by parents, some by other donors. So we have something, but we need the federal government to make it consistent and grow it, because right now the affordability crisis is really important.
Now, there are many ways to organize a national school food program. For example, in Prince Edward Island, parents pay what they can for a hot lunch. But what all the experts we spoke to agreed on was that the best thing to do is to offer the same food to all the students, not just those who need it, because that avoids stigma.
Any child who wants a snack or a lunch can access that through the school, whether they're on the list or not on the list. Because you're absolutely right, we really are focused on stigma and trying to make sure that there isn't any.
So how close is Canada to getting such a program? The Liberals made a promise on it back in 2021, $1 billion over 5 years, but it has not appeared in a federal budget since. In a statement to CBC News, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Jenna Sudds, said that the government just completed an exhaustive consultation process. The report will be out soon, and that the results showed overwhelming support for such a program. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.